Good afternoon, India and Darren and Laura. There hasn't been so much interaction online for the last week, and so I was thinking that I might jumpstart this with a short video and see if this helps your learning. And then, if it does, maybe you want to respond in kind and shoot your own videos and send them. Or we can also, after this, we can also set up a time for all of us to talk. But anyway, let me talk a little bit about interviewing and interviews and the documenting of the interviews. Um, there is material on the resources list on Sakai, and you have read the articles, and so this is just a broad overview of what I would like for you to do. There's much to say about the topic, and actually I'll be reading from a pre-prepared text because at Living I wasn't trusting myself that I would actually say everything that I wanted you to hear. So bear with me as I go back and forth looking at the text and looking at you. Anyway, much to say about the topic, much of which you have read on the assigned articles. But just very briefly, much knowledge gets created, acquired, and transferred through human interaction. Whether we meet at the office cooler in the office, the grocery store, in the bus line, while picking up or dropping off our kids at school or daycare, we learn from and about each other. We may not even talk beyond a simple hello, but there are multitudes of sensory data points in just a brief viewing or an exchange of one word. For example, the hello may have been uttered in a gruff voice, which may lead us to infer that the speaker does not want to interact any more than absolutely necessary. Maybe because he has laryngitis or is preoccupied with any number of preoccupying emotions. Or the person may smile without saying more, leading you to believe that the smile, more than the words, are an invitation for further interactions. This small vignette could be called an interview of sorts, though an impromptu, informal kind of a one. The point is that we learn with and about each other through interviews all the time. In this course, we're stepping it up a notch by setting up formal interviews, which are not at all impromptu. They're with carefully selected candidates, interview questions that have been defined, and plans for recording and documenting. These interviews are also exceedingly focused rather than open-ended because the purposes of these interviews are clearly defined, and they include: number one, you're supposed to network with an academic or a professional who is in your field of study. Number two, you are about to learn about him or her and how they got there, he or she, to where you want to be. So you may ask them about their schooling and how they developed their career path. Number three, in order to get their assessment about the state of their field, you might ask them about the joys, the challenges that they have encountered, and what the most pressing contemporary issues are in their assessment. And number four, one of the purposes is to learn about the history and development of their fields, their assessment of it. You can ask questions about what are the important theories that they have learned about, who are the important theorists, what are the books, the articles that they read, the conferences they go to, what are the associations that they are part of. All this information will be pertinent as you compose your next assignment, which is the narrative of the history and development of your fields of study. Let me go back to the interviews. I recommend strongly that you audio record every interview. If you can video record, so much the better. Immediately after interview, play it back in your study. Take notes of the most important points. Next, start on the written documentation of the interview. Begin with the introduction. Each introduction should be preceded by a general description of who the person is. That is her name, the professional position, the educational background, and where you meet. Number two is the description. This is a summary of the general flow of the conversation. In this part, you simply describe what happened. It is up to you how much detail you want to include. If you transcribe the interview, you will likely have a lot of detail, otherwise you may not. In case you wonder what I mean by description, here's an example. She sat in her chair, she wore a green blouse, she said, and so on. So you don't interpret, you don't reflect, you simply describe what is. You get to reflect in the next part, and the reflection part, where you describe how you experienced the interview, what your feelings were about the flow, the rapport, the surprises, the challenges. So one example would be that a reflection would be, she spoke so much that it was hard for me to get a word in. This resulted in a challenge for me to keep us on track. That would be an example of a reflection. Then lastly, there is the analysis, and that has two parts. First, you make meaning of each interview separately with respect to your goals. Did you get what you wanted and needed? What did you learn? What next questions emerged from that you may want to research or pose in your next interview? Next, you make a careful note of all the facts that you want to remember. Make a list of all the theories you want to remember, the books and articles your interviews mentioned, the professional associations you could be joining. And after you have completed all 3 interviews, I would like for you to look at all 3 interviews side by side and then to investigate the following question. What are the common themes among those interviews? Where there are certain theories that all 3 interviewees mentioned? Were there divergences? Did they disagree? In what areas did they disagree? Did you get everything that you wanted? Or do you need to go back, call them up, and ask deeper questions? Like, you said such and I really didn't understand that. Could you clarify for me? What are the areas that you want to set aside for right now that you might want to explore in further classes? And based on all the data that you have collected, what do you think you want to do next with them? So this has to do with how I would like for you to write up the interviews. So that's a pretty lengthy process, and I want you to follow that exact structure for each interview. So you start with an introduction, then you follow it with a description, with a reflection, and you end with the analysis. Here are a few more general suggestions. If you're stimulated by audiovisual examples of interviews, I encourage you to do a search online. By now, all of you have identified certain authors whose books you admire. See if there are YouTube interviews on the web where they may have been interviewed, or see if they have presented on TED Talks. So the website for the TED Talks is www.ted.com/talks. And here are 2 additional excellent resources for interviews. National Public Radio, NPR.org, has a show called Fresh Air, and Terry Gross is an interviewer par excellence. She has wonderful podcasts on many, many different subjects, which are in the Fresh Air place on NPR. So I really recommend that you check some of them out, download them, listen to them, and learn from how she strategizes in her interviews. Then there is the Public Broadcasting Service, PBS, that's at pbs.org. And there is Bill Moyers, who has interviewed many interesting people. And observing his interviewing skills can be really, really interesting. So PBS is also online and has archived many of Bill Moyers' interviews. And so I encourage you to do all this, and then if you find some great interviews that you could share with us, then post the link, and I'd like to take a look, and we can all learn from other people who do interviews for a living. So this concludes the first audio. I hope you like it. Respond with one if you'd like to, and otherwise I will see you on Sakai. Bye-bye.